Hello and welcome to this Price Beam webinar. Today is a bit of a different format for those of you who follow our regular webinars. Today we've invited one of our good friends and partners, Mark Peacock, who is, in my opinion, one of the great thought leaders in pricing. Mark has written books about pricing. He's a very knowledgeable consultant, guest lecturer, author, and is really one of the people that I personally listen to a lot when it comes to pricing and what's happening in the space of pricing. So welcome to our webinar, Mark.
Thank you very much, Finn. Appreciate the introduction there. That's lovely to hear, but thank you very much.
It's good to have you. So today's topic is really we want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the space of pricing, get your feeling for how companies should be dealing with pricing maybe in the coming year. I know a lot of clients of yours probably are setting prices for next year if they are planning ahead. What's happening in pricing these days?
So what's happening in pricing? I think a lot of companies are still doing the same thing, to be honest with you, which isn't necessarily the right thing. Whether you're a small to medium-sized enterprise or a large corporate, a lot of the experiences I have is that pricing policy is still being set largely on a cost plus margin basis.
Right.
Maybe competitor based element within that, and still relatively few looking at customer based pricing or incorporating willingness to pay. And obviously many companies in the last year and a half, particularly in the UK and Europe, have been significantly affected by rising costs, right? Caused by inflation, war in Ukraine, rising energy costs, rising labor costs, rising supply costs all over the world. And I think many of those businesses have taken steps to increase their prices, whereas pre-COVID, they might not have. They would have been more reluctant to do so. And they've kind of done it, and it kind of worked, and they kind of got away with it, if you like. But it's still very based on a very kind of rudimentary approach to pricing planning, as I would think of it, and as you know it. So for me, I think, one of the most important messages that we can be pushing out there is just raising the importance of raising the awareness of the importance of understanding how to measure willingness to pay and incorporating price elasticity properly into forecasts, budgets, business plans, anything that has a price in it somewhere, because not enough attention is still paid to it today. Whether I've seen this in large corporates. I was working with a recent client that your company helped me with. The head of pricing was still doing everything on based on profit targets and risk appetite, but it was the product director who instigated the piece of work to say, well, should we find out how much our customers are willing to pay for these products? And they found it game changing, right? Absolutely game changing. Transformational was the language they used. But then that's probably because I knew the product director and I'd mentioned it to them. So the wider awareness of smarter pricing based on customer demand, customer preference, is still not fully understood, I think. And I wish more companies, whether you're a business owner, a business leader, or a pricing director, I wish more companies would just put a bit more time, effort, and thought into it, because it's make a huge difference. And then you don't get stuck on, well, our costs have gone up by 10%. What are we going to do with prices? Our customers will never accept it.
Do you think that has changed over the last couple of years with all the changes in the macro environments, as you said, COVID, war, supply chain cost? Do you think pricing has been a bit elevated now compared to where we were in 2019 or 2020?
I really do. In my experience, pre-COVID. So in the UK, in the decade prior to COVID, inflation had been basically flat, right? No
Yeah.
more than 2% for a whole decade. And low interest rates, negligible interest rates. So we got so used to that situation. And the way many businesses reacted to that was they felt they didn't have to put up prices because it was such a small number, it didn't seem worth worrying about, which is the wrong conclusion. But that was the mindset that many businesses got into pre-COVID. Post-COVID, the massive increase in inflationary inputs that we've had in the last year and a half, and going through that period, I think many businesses have been forced to put up prices to cover increased costs. As I said earlier, have kind of done it okay, but could have done it a lot better if they'd known about the pricing techniques. And maybe now feel, okay, well, we've done that. It wasn't as bad as we thought. Well, we're fine. But then, of course, thinking ahead to next year, so inflation in the UK is currently 6 to 7%, and it's forecast to drop to 2 to 3% by May, April, June next year. So it's going to come back down to normal levels. My worry is that businesses will then revert back to their previous habits of just ignoring it. Not that all pricing decisions should be driven by cost inflation, of course, but it tells us where the business population is at in terms of the importance they attach to pricing decisions, or not, as the case may be, and and how seriously they think about pricing strategy. So yeah, it's been a notable change for me in the past 2 years, I would say.
When you work with your clients on let's say upping the game, understanding or be more aware of pricing, how do you get them involved? I mean, I imagine the pricing director is almost she or he will, they will be turned on anyway, but energized anyway. But what about the other teams? Are they more just reluctant? Are they actively fighting against you, or how do you get the organization excited compared to the one or two individuals?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. There's never any clear-cut rule. I think it might be the pricing people that are championing it. It might not. They might be secondary in the decision process to invest in this kind of work. And it's more led by product teams or marketing directors who've got a new product they want to launch, or they're entering a new market, for example. So it can cut both ways, I think. But I think the answer is always you have to engage them in the process, right? Whether it's sales, marketing, product, pricing. You have to take people along with you on the journey. I mean, and the worst thing you can do is just turn up at the end of a project and present a slide deck and say, there you go, there are your findings, off you go and crack on with it. Because there'll be so much resistance, because it's just human nature, right? People are scared of raising prices. They are very, very scared of it. And they don't really, and their brain stops, at that point. But I see it part of my job to help people get past that fear by recognizing it, putting in place a clear strategy, which doesn't have to be complicated, articulating the rationale for whatever pricing, policy that they want to follow, using a bit of research to support the decisions if needed. And then I think particularly for sales teams or anybody who's being asked or tasked, I should say, with selling prices to an audience, typically more so in a B2B context, is making sure they're fully engaged and fully trained. And I had a great client recently. They're quite a small business. They provided outsourced financial services for medium-sized companies. And they had a large team of people around the country, over 100. And we spent about 3 months on developing the pricing strategy, and then another 3 months working and preparing the training materials for the sales teams. So you have to put as much effort into the implementation as you do setting the prices. And I think that's where many many initiatives might fail because
Mm-hmm.
we've got a nice slide deck. There's a nice little
Mm.
Excel model over here. You just plug in your inputs and your variables, and out pops an answer, and go and sell it. And not enough effort is put into justifying value differentials and understanding customer price segmentation models and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you just got to engage the core team in the journey, Finn,
Mm-hmm.
and help them come to terms with the new pricing model, I think.
It's almost ironic that you and I probably agree that value-based pricing is the best strategy for pricing, at least if you have the insights and the data points, etc., to implement it. And that yet it's a cost it's a cost effect that is increasing the awareness of pricing, at least in certain organizations, compared to where
Yeah,
we were, right? So
I
I do
know
share
it's
your,
frustrating.
yeah, I do share your bit of your worry that maybe once inflation is gone down again, then our company is going to look at other things.
Mm.
How do you see the role of if RGM managers, pricing managers have gotten now more a leading role? How do you think they can keep that role? Do they need to expand? Do they what do pricing people need to do once they become now, let's call it, more popular or at least more important in the organization?
Yeah, I think for me, there's two skills that
Mm-hmm.
they need to embrace. One is strategy, pricing strategy, and the other one is leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So you can only become recognized internally as a thought leader by developing your thinking and your plans on a clear strategy. So
Mm-hmm.
moving away from the analytical models and getting closer to the heart of the business strategy that you're trying to help support.
Mm-hmm.
And I always remember the quote from the book Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rummelt. He's a professor of strategy in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, good strategy is always based on a completely honest assessment of your current situation. Completely honest. So taking out all of the internal biases, for example, and maybe getting some market feedback. And only then can you start to work out, well, where can we go?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'd love to, see more commercial people, pricing, marketing, sales, whatever roles, thinking more about the core strategy. So what is our sustainable competitive advantage? Why do customers buy from us over anybody else? And how can we attach a premium to what we do, or a price advantage,
Yeah.
whatever the situation requires. So having a clear strategy, pricing
Mm-hmm.
strategy, not just business strategy. And then secondly, developing leadership skills, because you
Mm-hmm.
can't sit in a corner and hide behind your two monitors and fling out spreadsheets and hope
Mm.
to influence the tough old sales director who will throw back at you plenty of stories of, well, have you met this customer? Have you met that customer? And
Yeah.
all of this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So leadership and personal credibility are vital, I think, for getting the influence that this subject needs. I mean, we all know how impactful better pricing can be.
Mm-hmm.
You and I do. Everybody on this call probably does. And it's a big frustration at times that it doesn't get the airtime and the treatment it deserves. So yeah, I think those are the two things: strategy and leadership. That'd be my hot takes on what people
Sure.
need to do. What about you? What do you think on that?
Well, I mean, I think always a bit. It's a bit of a difficult challenge sometimes that pricing. And I saw a chart the other day where they were arguing, well, pricing should be sitting in the center of everything. And I'm sure that if we went to one of the pricing conferences, everybody would clap and applaud and say, "Yeah, you're absolutely right." But very often I find that when I go out and speak with people in various companies, be it in B2B, be it in B2C, pricing is far from the center of that company.
Yeah.
Quite the contrary. And it's almost seen as a little bit of a not that necessary support function. So I do think that it is improving. I mean, if I'm old enough to have followed pricing for quite a few years now, and I see how. I mean, there used to be no pricing directors, or VP of pricing was almost unheard of 20 years ago. This day, it has changed, but it's still a transition. I think sometimes the pricing industry needs to maybe also almost paint a path from where you're coming in terms of careers, right? Especially if you're working in a larger corporation. One thing is a small company, but if you're working in a larger corporation, where you're coming from when you're coming into the revenue growth team or the pricing team, where you're going to go from there, because probably that's not the end of your career to be in pricing, at least not for most people. And also things like, even does pricing sit in, does it reporting to the CFO or the CMO or the product people? And I think it's still not clear in many organizations. And if it's not clear, you get parked on the side.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, big or small. But I think the beauty of pricing is it touches nearly every function, right? So it touches product, it touches marketing, it touches sales, it touches finance, it touches operations, and so on. So the beauty of working in pricing is you get to work with people in all of those different areas and help them achieve their challenges. So you're very well placed, I think, as anybody who's gone through a pricing role, when you come out the other side, to grow into more senior commercial roles. You know, whether that's looking at commercial strategy, marketing, product development, whatever it is, because you've, you know, been very close to the numbers, but also if you're doing it properly and thinking about it in the way that you should, close to understanding the core business strategy, as I alluded to earlier. You know, differential value, competitive advantage, understanding customers, and so on. And that's really what business is about, right? I mean, we dress it up with all these fancy words, but ultimately we're just trying to help our customers get the benefits they desire from our product or service at a price that's acceptable and for which we can make a good enough margin. So yeah, I think you know, any more junior people in pricing roles, you know, think big, you know, don't be afraid to expand your horizons, I would say. So I like what you said there.
Yeah. If we are expecting that inflation, at least in most countries, if not all, is going down next year, what's the next horizon for the pricing team? Is what should they work on? Do you think it's back to now the companies need top line growth because they've been, well, top line growth not driven by price, and therefore it's more about pricing new products? Or do you think they're still more in a cost cutting mode, cutting assortments, finding out the products that shouldn't be in part of their assortment any longer? What's the challenge if we're no longer fighting the inflation dragon and you have other battles to fight?
I mean, I think all of those things that you said could, you know, well play a part depending on the circumstances of the business. I think what I would invite people to think about is, what's your pricing response going to be next summer when inflation is back down to 2% or normal levels?
Yeah.
And then you're starting to get pushback from your customers, whether it's B2C or B2B, on the basis that they think, oh, well, your prices should be cheaper now. So we need to think ahead, basically. We need to think ahead. So it's even a year from now, what are we going to do in a year's time, 9 to 12 months' time, when largely inflation should have come down? It might not have, but it should have. And I don't want people to fall into the trap or the danger of thinking, oh, phew, it's back to normal. We don't need to worry about that again. We can just start playing around with promotional pricing tactics and I don't know, range assortment and new product development. I mean, all of those things are important, right? But just encourage people to step up a level and look at it more strategically. You know, and a good way to think about that is I always say to businesses, you know, what price ambition are you setting in your business plan, your targets for the next 3 years? So in your out years, year 1, year 2, and year 3, you should be looking to constantly raise price and then asking yourself, not just because of inflation or cost increases, but asking yourself, how can we create enough value to justify that price? So it comes back to branding, product innovation, differentiation, sales effectiveness, whatever it is. So if your price is £100 today, set yourself the challenge and say, well, next year we want it to be achieved £110, the year after 120, and the year after that 130. How are we going to get there? And it needs a strategy to support that, right? It's right. Well, what levers can we pull? So yes, think ahead to latter part of next year when the inflationary environment is back to normal-ish, and start to consider what your pricing response is going to be from people that might be pushing back on that. And then think further ahead, year 1, year 2, year 3 in your business plan, and say, well, where do we want to be price levels for our core products over those 3 years? And let's set a plan, let's set an ambition, and help us work out how we're going to get there. So yeah, that's what I would be.
We've all heard of those, all heard those Halloween horror stories about this brand or this product has not been increased for the last 10 years, and it's because we couldn't. Of course you can. You're quite a well-known brand. Where do you see insights and things like what Pricebeam does with understanding customers better? Does that move the needle?
It does, 100%. I'm just not sure people realize that, because they might come to you or me for the same kind of service and say, what price levels can we charge for this product? And we can find that out quite easily. But the secondary benefit you get from the kind of work you guys do is massive insight into customer segmentation. By different profiles, different demographics, product preferences, and so on. And that can be quite influential in terms of influencing marketing strategy, product development plans, as well as pricing. So I think, I've seen that, you've seen that in all of the work that you've done. It's very powerful, and it can actually significantly reshape the business strategy for the product or the division that's looking at it. So yeah, it's all there in the data. It's not that difficult to get and to put together. So why wouldn't you want to find out more about older customers might be willing to pay as opposed to younger customers, or different markets or different regions, or by shopping habits or whatever it is. There's lots of ways to cut the data and segment the market, and then find those sweet spots, those golden opportunities of possibility where say, well, if we do this and that for these kind of customers, we can make good money here.
I think really the segmentation is, you're hitting that spot on. It's not only just how can we increase prices, or no, we can't increase prices, right? But that assumes almost like every customer or every consumer is the same. And in reality, there are many different, for most businesses, both in B2B and in B2C, the customer base is not homogeneous. They're so different. And even if they might all be buying the same product, the same service, there's still those who really just buy it because they have to, or because it's an absolute necessity in their business. And then others where quite easily you could charge more. Maybe you need to add a bit more service. Maybe you need to do something else. Maybe you need to change the packaging if it's consumer goods, or the ingredients if it's consumer goods. But it's such a heterogeneous market, and very often I find still that we as pricing people will come to it with, well, there's a demand curve and there's a supply curve, and there's only one true price. But in reality, there should be 4 or 5 prices, right? Because there are different people, different segments, willing to pay very, very different amounts of money.
Yeah, and the biggest mistake every business makes is that they assume all of their customers that are at the low end of the willingness to price.
Yes.
So they price everything at the low end of the scale because we need growth, right? And we don't want price to be an inhibitor. But they miss out on capturing revenue, margin, and value from those other segments that are willing to pay more. If you can present a slightly altered proposition to them, just a high, medium, low set of price points or packages or options, tiers, can be incredibly powerful. And makes it easier to sell, and it will raise your average selling price.
Yeah.
So a bit of creativity around your pricing as well, I think, is a great one to think about. Don't just follow the same old model that you've always used. How can you evolve the pricing model, including the product offering, to give you a platform to be able to capture more in terms of price and value? So tiered pricing, good, better, best, all of those kind of things are great ways of helping you achieve the same outcome, higher prices, but in a way that your customers like. And actually prefer, rather than just saying prices have gone up by 10%.
Do you see a lot of innovation in pricing itself, as not as opposed to in the products or the services that are being priced, but is there a lot of new thinking in pricing, or not? Maybe
I think the only area where you see a lot of, what I call it, innovation, a lot of certainly development, is in SaaS pricing and subscription pricing. I think that market is ahead of the curve. I think they are. So many of the leading players are constantly trying different things, and they are expert level when it comes to trying out different packages, different pricing plans, and have a clear pricing plan and pricing strategy. Outside of that, in more traditional industries, I don't see much innovation in pricing. I think people don't know how to innovate pricing. And I always say it's like your pricing strategy is like your brand strategy. It should be entirely unique to you. It should play on your strengths. It should be attractive to your customers, and it should differentiate you from the competition. So don't just do cost plus margin because everybody else does cost plus margin. You come up with your own pricing strategy that's unique to you. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to reinvent the world with this, but you do need to put some effort into, making it as unique to your organization as your brand strategy is, for example.
We got a question actually on the chat. Maybe we have time for that. What materials are typically prepared for the sales team for the price change discussions? PowerPoint slides, presentations, etc. So it's about, how do you prepare the sales team?
Yeah, so I did a recent post on this actually, and you'll find it on LinkedIn if you scroll back a bit. But I mean, the answer is you can't do enough, right? So you need to organize a training session. So you need to prepare your slide decks. You need to prepare templates, example pricing proposals. You can create little pricing models that they can play around with in Excel. You need to do some role playing. You need to have open discussions with them to let them climb up the learning curve, etc. Do as much as you could think you need to do, because from the first of the month, when they start then going out selling, you want them to be as confident a place as possible. And if there's a shred of doubt in their minds, they'll revert back to what they used to do. Right? And then once it's up and running, you need to keep an eye on it. So coaching, checking price KPIs by product, by channel, by sales rep, if you need to. Targeting it, incentivizing it, and so on. So yeah, it really doesn't stop once the pricing strategy is done. Really the hard work comes with implementation, I think, and taking the time to let it sink in and helping those who are struggling with it. So it's a much more of a supportive role. So I hope that's answered the person's question, but yeah.
Sure, I'm sure you can be contacted if the person wants to ask more at a later stage. Got a comment here, or question. The biggest issue we had with taking price up and then later down was that customers padded their profits on the way up and then didn't pass through the reduction to consumers on the way down. Yeah, I guess there's always a bit of negotiation and difficulty there when you're selling through channels.
yeah. I mean, everyone's desperate for an extra buck, right, on their bottom line. So we're not going to criticize tactics here, but I think I mean the point I make there is that pricing is always a long-term game, right? Always. Every single decision you make on price will affect your long-term business. So if you make a short-term decision to cut prices to win more business, that will impact your future growth prospects. If you're misleading with your pricing, that will affect brand loyalty and customer retention. So any tactics that aren't going to be sustainable in the long term can have a negative effect further down the line, and encourage people just to think those through and avoid them if you can, because you might think you can get away with it, but in the long run you won't. It's got to be always done from an ethical point of view, I think. But yeah, think long term as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I think we're getting towards the end of the webinar. Maybe just a final question for me. What's the outlook for pricing? Going up, going down, flat? What's reason to be optimistic, super optimistic as a pricing profession?
It's a good question. I think, well, as we were advising our listeners, we have to find the pockets of opportunity, right? I think across the board, it's probably still a bit flat, low growth, but I think within that there are pockets of opportunity, and just playing to your strengths as well, I would suggest. So yeah, I think that's my view on it.
On a scale from 1 to 10, reasons to be optimistic? 10 being
I would say 7.
Great,
fantastic. 7 out of 10.
That's still pretty good for pricing. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Mark, and thank you for our listeners and the visitors as well. This webinar has been recorded and will be available later on various social media channels and websites. So follow us if you didn't have the chance to watch it in full. And with that, we end today's webinar. Thank you so much.